This story is titled, My Entitled Aunt Demanded I Give Her My Inheritance Because She Deserved It More, so I Shut Her Down Publicly. Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old and I'm from a small town in the United States. Let me take you back to a time when I had to face a whirlwind of entitlement, drama, and betrayal, coming from none other than my aunt, someone I thought I could trust. It all started about a year ago when my grandmother, the matriarch of our family, passed away. She was my rock, my best friend, and the glue that held our family together. Losing her was devastating, but what came afterward was something I could have never prepared for. My grandmother had been incredibly wise and careful with her finances. She worked hard her entire life, saving and investing so she could leave behind something meaningful for her family. She left behind a will that outlined everything clearly. A portion of her estate went to her children, my dad, his two sisters, and my mom as her in-law. The rest was divided among her grandchildren, including me. I received a generous sum, which Grandma intended for me to use for my future, a dream house, starting a business, or even just for security. For me, that money wasn't just an inheritance, it was her legacy, her way of supporting me, even after she was gone. Well, she saw it as an opportunity, a golden ticket she felt entitled to claim. Aunt Carol had always been the dramatic one in the family. She loved to play the victim, and her favorite line was, "Life hasn't been fair to me." Sure, she'd had her struggles. Bad financial decisions, a messy divorce, and a series of job losses. But instead of taking accountability, she had a knack for blaming everyone else. So when she found out about my inheritance, I should have known trouble was brewing. It started subtly at first. She'd make little comments during family gatherings like, "You're so lucky, Sarah," or, "I wish I had someone to leave me that kind of money." I brushed it off, thinking she was just venting. But soon, her comments became more pointed. "Don't you think it's unfair that Grandma gave you so much? I mean, I've struggled my whole life, and I could really use that money." I was taken aback. What was I supposed to say to that? I tried to be polite, explaining that the money wasn't about luck. It was about Grandma's decision to support her family in her own way. But Aunt Carol wasn't interested in my reasoning. She was building her case, and I was her target. The turning point came during a family dinner at my parents' house. Aunt Carol brought up the inheritance again, but this time she didn't hold back. "Sarah," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "don't you think it's only fair to share your inheritance with me? After all, I'm older, I've been through more, and I deserve it more than you." I was stunned. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. My heart was pounding, but I managed to respond calmly. "Aunt Carol, I understand that you've had a tough time, but this money was Grandma's choice. She wanted me to have it, and I plan to honor her wishes." That wasn't good enough for her. She doubled down, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. "You don't even need that money," she snapped. "You're young, you have a good job, and your parents support you. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to make ends meet. Grandma would want me to have it." At that moment, I realized this wasn't just about money for Aunt Carol. It was about control, manipulation, and her need to play the victim. But I wasn't about to let her guilt me into giving up something that Grandma had entrusted to me. Still, I wanted to handle the situation privately, so I pulled Aunt Carol aside after dinner. I tried to explain, once again, that the inheritance wasn't up for discussion. "I'm sorry you're going through a tough time," I told her, "but this money isn't something I can just give away. It was Grandma's decision, not mine." But Aunt Carol wasn't having it. She accused me of being heartless, greedy, and disrespectful. "You're just a spoiled little girl who doesn't understand what it's like to struggle," she hissed. "If you had any decency, you'd help your family instead of hoarding that money for yourself." I was furious, but I kept my composure. "This isn't about decency, Aunt Carol. It's about respecting Grandma's wishes. She wanted all of us to have something, and that's exactly what she made happen. Unfortunately, my attempt to resolve things privately didn't work." Aunt Carol wasn't ready to back down, and what she did next took the situation to a whole new level. She decided to take her case public. Aunt Carol's next move was bold, calculated, and completely outrageous. She turned to social media to air her grievances, painting herself as a victim and me as the villain. It started with a vague post on her Facebook page, something along the lines of, "Some people in this family have no sense of compassion or loyalty. It's heartbreaking when your own blood turns their back on you in your time of need." She didn't name names, but it didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Family members began messaging me, asking what was going on. At first, I ignored it, hoping it would blow over. But Aunt Carol wasn't done. Her posts became more direct and dramatic. She accused me of hoarding wealth, disrespecting family values, and even betraying my grandmother's memory. She claimed that I didn't deserve the inheritance and that it should have gone to someone who needed it, like her. The worst part? Some of our extended family bought into her narrative. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt entitled to weigh in, sending me messages like, "Why wouldn't you help your aunt?" Or "Family comes first, Sarah." I felt trapped. No matter what I said or did, Aunt Carol's smear campaign was gaining traction. The comments under her posts were filled with sympathy and support. People were calling me selfish, greedy, and spoiled, all based on her twisted version of the truth. At one point, my mom stepped in and tried to reason with her. She called Aunt Carol and told her to stop stirring up drama, reminding her that Grandma's will was final and that it wasn't anyone's place to question it. But Aunt Carol was relentless. She doubled down, accusing my mom of enabling me, and even going as far as suggesting that our side of the family had manipulated Grandma into writing the will the way she did. Things escalated further when Aunt Carol started showing up unannounced at family gatherings, turning every occasion into a battlefield. She'd bring up the inheritance at every opportunity, loudly proclaiming how unfair it was that I was sitting on a fortune while she was struggling to pay her bills. At first, I tried to remain calm, but her accusations were starting to chip away at me. I hated being painted as the bad guy, especially when I'd done nothing wrong. The inheritance wasn't something I asked for. It was a gift from Grandma, one that I cherished deeply. I had plans for that money, plans that would honor her memory, but Aunt Carol's entitlement was turning something beautiful into a nightmare. The final straw came when Aunt Carol tried to take things a step further. She demanded a family meeting to settle the matter. She called my dad and told him we needed to sit down as a family to discuss redistributing the inheritance. My dad was furious, but he agreed to the meeting, hoping to put an end to the chaos once and for all. The meeting took place at my parents' house. It was tense from the start. Aunt Carol came prepared with a list of reasons why she deserved a portion of my inheritance. She cited her financial struggles, her years of hardship, and even claimed that Grandma would have wanted her to have the money if she'd known how bad things had gotten. I listened quietly at first, letting her have her say, but when she started accusing me of being manipulative and ungrateful, I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Aunt Carol," I said, my voice shaking but firm, "this isn't about what you think you deserve. This is about Grandma's wishes. She made her decision, and it's not up for debate. I'm not going to let you guilt me into giving away something that was meant for me. I've respected you my entire life, but this is where I draw the line." The room went silent. Aunt Carol stared at me, stunned that I'd finally stood up to her. But instead of backing down, she lashed out. "You're nothing but a selfish, spoiled brat," she spat. "You don't deserve that money, and you'll regret this one day, mark my words." At that moment, I realized there was no reasoning with her. She was so consumed by her entitlement and bitterness that she couldn't see past her own wants. What happened next was both shocking and liberating. My cousin, Aunt Carol's own son, spoke up. "Mom, enough," he said firmly. "This isn't Sarah's fault. You're embarrassing yourself and dragging the family into something that isn't your business. Grandma made her decision, and you need to respect it." His words were a turning point. For the first time, Aunt Carol was speechless. The rest of the family began chiming in, agreeing that the inheritance wasn't something she had a right to demand. But Aunt Carol wasn't one to admit defeat easily. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. I thought that would be the end of it, but little did I know she had one more trick up her sleeve, a move that would take her entitlement to a whole new level. A few weeks after the family meeting, I thought things had finally settled down. Aunt Carol had gone silent, which I assumed was her way of licking her wounds after the public embarrassment. But I should have known better. Silence from her wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm. One day, I received a letter in the mail that made my blood boil. It was from a lawyer. Aunt Carol had decided to challenge Grandma's will in court, claiming there was undue influence in how it was written. She argued that I had manipulated Grandma into leaving me a larger share of the inheritance, and that the division of assets was unfair and invalid. It was utterly ridiculous. Grandma's will had been written years before her health declined and was witnessed by legal professionals. There was no undue influence to speak of, just Aunt Carol's desperation to twist the narrative in her favor. I immediately contacted my own lawyer, who reassured me that Aunt Carol's case was baseless. "She's grasping at straws," my lawyer said. "This is a scare tactic, nothing more. The will is airtight." While that gave me some relief, it didn't stop the anger and frustration that bubbled inside me. Aunt Carol's actions weren't just an attack on me, they were an insult to Grandma's memory. How dare she question Grandma's wishes and drag our family through this mess for her own selfish gain? As the legal process unfolded, Aunt Carol's true colors became even more apparent. She started reaching out to extended family members, trying to rally them to her side. She painted me as the villain, claiming that I had somehow tricked Grandma into leaving me the money. "Sarah doesn't even need it," she told them. "I'm the one who's struggling. She should be ashamed of herself." Thankfully, most of the family saw through her lies. The more she talked, the more she exposed her own entitlement and greed. But there were still a few who took her side, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. I'd always tried to be kind and generous with my family, but this situation was opening my eyes to who truly had my back, and who didn't. The court proceedings dragged on for months. Aunt Carol tried every tactic in the book to discredit me and twist the story. She even went so far as to claim that Grandma wasn't in her right mind when she wrote the will, which was a blatant lie. Grandma had been sharp as a tack until the very end, and everyone who knew her could attest to that. When it was finally time for the hearing, I was both nervous and ready. I'd prepared myself for Aunt Carol's theatrics, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer audacity of her testimony. She sat in that courtroom, crocodile tears streaming down her face, and told the judge that she had always been Grandma's favorite, and that the will must have been tampered with. It was laughable. Aunt Carol had never been close to Grandma, and everyone in the family knew it. If anything, Grandma had gone out of her way to avoid her drama and entitlement. My lawyer presented our case clearly and confidently, emphasizing that the will had been written and signed under legal supervision and that there was absolutely no evidence of tampering or undue influence. My dad and other family members testified on my behalf, sharing how Grandma had made her wishes clear to everyone before she passed. The judge didn't take long to see through Aunt Carol's lies. In her final ruling, she upheld the validity of the will and dismissed Aunt Carol's claims as baseless. But the judge didn't stop there. She also reprimanded Aunt Carol for wasting the court's time and resources on such a frivolous case. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the ruling was announced. Justice had prevailed, and Grandma's wishes were protected. But my relief was quickly overshadowed by the sight of Aunt Carol storming out of the courtroom, her face twisted in anger. She had lost, and she knew it. But the story wasn't over yet. Aunt Carol wasn't just angry, she was humiliated. And in true Aunt Carol fashion, she decided to double down on her entitlement in a way that would leave the entire family stunned. After losing in court, Aunt Carol went completely off the rails. It wasn't enough that she had dragged my name through the mud and wasted everyone's time with her baseless lawsuit. She decided to escalate things even further. One evening, I got a call from my mom, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this," she said. "Carol's been going around telling people that you bribed the judge." I froze. "What? That's ridiculous. Why would anyone believe that?" Mom sighed. "You know how she is. She's desperate and embarrassed, and now she's trying to save face by making up lies. She even told Aunt Linda that the whole court process was rigged against her because you're privileged." The audacity of her claim left me speechless. At this point, it was clear Aunt Carol wasn't just entitled, she was delusional. But what she did next crossed every imaginable line. A week later, I came home to find a handwritten note slipped under my front door. It wasn't signed, but I knew exactly who it was from the moment I read the opening sentence. "You may have won this round, but karma will come for you." The letter went on to accuse me of being a horrible person for not sharing my inheritance, and warned me that my selfishness would lead to my downfall. It even implied that I was disrespecting Grandma's memory by refusing to help Aunt Carol. I felt a chill run down my spine. While the letter wasn't overtly threatening, it was enough to make me feel uneasy. I immediately called my lawyer and showed them the note. They advised me to file a police report, just to document the incident in case things escalated. But as unsettling as the note was, I refused to let Aunt Carol intimidate me. I was done playing defense. It was time to shut her down once and for all, and this time, I wasn't going to hold back. At the next family gathering, which Aunt Carol surprisingly attended despite all the drama, I decided to address everything head on. I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady, and said, "I think it's time we clear the air." The room went quiet. Aunt Carol, who had been chatting loudly with one of my cousins, froze and glared at me. "I know there's been a lot of tension in the family lately, and I want to set the record straight," I began. "Grandma's will was her decision. It was written and signed legally, with no influence from anyone. The court has already ruled on this, and yet I'm still being attacked and accused of things that aren't true." I looked directly at Aunt Carol. "I've tried to handle this privately. I've tried to be respectful, but I won't stand by while lies are being spread about me and my character. If anyone has questions about the inheritance, I'm happy to answer them honestly, but what I won't tolerate is manipulation and entitlement." The room was dead silent. Aunt Carol opened her mouth, probably to launch into one of her dramatic tirades, but I cut her off. "And one more thing," I added, my voice firm. "Grandma left her estate the way she did because she wanted to support all of us in the ways she saw fit. Her decision was final, and it's not up for debate. If you truly loved and respected her, you'd honor her wishes instead of trying to tear this family apart." Aunt Carol's face turned bright red. For once, she was speechless. The rest of the family, many of whom had stayed neutral throughout the ordeal, began murmuring in agreement. "I think Sarah's right," one cousin said. "This has gone on long enough. We need to move on and stop fighting over something that isn't ours to decide." Others nodded, and the atmosphere shifted. For the first time in months, I felt like the tide was turning. Aunt Carol, realizing she was outnumbered, grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house without another word. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as she left. It wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming my peace and finally standing up for myself. After that day, Aunt Carol kept her distance. She stopped attending family events, and the smear campaign died down. The silence was a relief, but it also left me reflecting on everything I'd been through. This ordeal had taught me a lot, not just about entitlement and greed, but about boundaries and self-respect. I learned that standing up for myself didn't make me selfish, and protecting what was mine didn't make me unkind. Grandma's inheritance was never about money to me. It was about her love and trust, and I knew I would use it wisely to honor her memory. So what do you think? How would you handle someone like Aunt Carol? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Thanks for listening.